The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them and hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in marketplaces and begged that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. The gospel of our Lord. You may be seated. You know, back when I got here to Calvary almost a year ago now, it's hard to believe, I heard a lot of you greet me in kind of the same way. A lot of you said, "Hey, welcome to Calvary. You are going to be so busy this year. We are going to work you. You're going to do a little bit of everything. You're not going to stop moving this year." And I can think back now over this year, now that I have about a week to go, I think I can say that you were right. It has been such a busy year. I can think back on specific days like Ash Wednesday when I got up early in the morning and stood at that cold train station and went downtown to Sundance Square in the afternoon and came back here and preached twice in the evening. It was such a long day. Or I can think about the marathon Christmas Eve, 4 services back to back to back to back, and the only rest I got all day was stealing away a sip of eggnog with Pastor Kyle between services. It has been such a busy year. So I think the life of an intern, I start to understand maybe what the life was like for those disciples for Jesus, always rushing around, going from place to place, moving, weaving through crowds, and sometimes not even having enough time to eat.
Drew, I know you're in the middle of something right now, but do you think we could talk?
Sarah, I'm kind of in the middle of something.
I know, it's just I hadn't thought about it until now, but we have been so busy, and now we're getting ready to leave, and we have to say goodbye to all these people, and that's going to be really hard. And then we're going back to Chicago, and you'll be so busy with your schoolwork, and then we're going to have to fill out paperwork and look for a church, and I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, Sarah, I definitely want to talk about all this, but I'm in the middle of preaching a sermon right now. Why don't you go sit down? We'll talk about all this later. Where was I? Yeah, I started to feel like the disciples in the story, so rushed and so busy and always moving around. And I think then we start to understand what it was like for Jesus to say, "Come away with me to a deserted place and rest for a while." I'm sure we've all had those really long days where you're busy at work all day, or you're moving around constantly, and you finally get home at the end of the day, and you just sit down and you're just about to take a bite of food, and bam, the phone rings, or a needy kid comes, or you have a chore that needs to be done. You're interrupted. That's what it must have been like for those disciples as Jesus finally says, "Come away with me to a deserted place, sit and rest," and bam! They're interrupted. Interrupted by the needs of this demanding crowd, these people who all just...
Drew, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. Do you mind if I just come up there?
Okay.
It's just, you're making it sound like this needy crowd are the bad guys in this story. And I get that the disciples were really tired and needed to rest, and it was probably really inconvenient for them to be interrupted, but this crowd, they had really important needs too. I mean, they were lost. They were hungry. They had a ton of sick people with them. It's not just the disciples who had needs in this story.
Yeah, I know, Sarah, but the thing is, we can all relate to the disciples, can't we? Because we all have those really long, busy days. We live such hectic, fast-paced lives. We even know what it is to be inconvenienced by interruptions.
It's just
Sarah,
that
interruptions are kind of annoying, aren't they? You know, when I have something to do, say, preach a sermon, I like to stick with it without being interrupted.
Yeah, Drew, but sometimes we can get so stuck to our own plans that we fail to see what God is doing. Drew, you've been so busy preaching and focusing on these disciples that I think you've forgotten to look at what Jesus is up to here.
No. I was getting there. Because in this story, Jesus is the whole time, Jesus is, well, like when the disciples are so busy and they're so tired and they're moving around, Jesus is,
fluffing up their pillows?
No, Jesus he's busy. Jesus is busy being interrupted by the needs of this crowd, and Jesus has compassion for them. Yes, Sarah, I have been so focused on preaching this sermon and preaching on these busy disciples that I totally ignored the fact that you had needs, that you needed to talk. So, all right, Sarah, what is it? What were you wanting to talk about?
Well, I was sitting there and listening to those readings, and it got me thinking. You know, in Jeremiah, it was talking about the people of Israel who were in exile, and they were being destroyed and scattered, and I guess I kind of feel a little bit scattered right now. You know, we're getting ready to move, and when people ask me where my home is, I never really know how to answer them. Drew, do you realize that this move is going to be my third move in 3 years?
Yeah, you know, I feel the same way. Sometimes being an intern or even being in seminary or just having a really busy life can make us feel so scattered and lost.
Yeah. And so when you feel scattered and lost,
well, in Jeremiah, God is like the good shepherd who gathers and comforts the people and the sheep when they're scattered. God makes them whole again. God even promises to raise up a righteous branch to care for the flock.
okay, well, how about Ephesians? You know, there's that group of uncircumcised people, and because of that, they're cut off from their community and without any hope. And I guess that just got me thinking about the broken relationships in my life, and I'm a little worried that when we leave here, there's going to be just so much to separate us from these relationships that we've made.
Yeah, but in Ephesians, Sarah, Paul says that Jesus is the one who bridges the gap between people, that Jesus breaks down those walls that separate us. Jesus even comes and proclaims peace, even to those who are far off.
Well, then the gospel story. We've been talking about the disciples this whole time, and I'm just not sure that I see myself as one of the disciples.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm not sure that the gospel story is is really all about how to be a good follower of Jesus. But maybe it's about why Jesus is the one worth following.
Sarah, if this story isn't about those tired and busy disciples and how to be a follower of Jesus, what is it about? Who are we in the story?
Maybe we're the crowd. Maybe we're one of those people on their mats being carried to Jesus.
On their mats? When they got out of the boat, people recognized him, and they rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. I hadn't even noticed that was even in there. But Sarah, I still don't even get it. I'm not sick. I'm in pretty good health. I don't really feel lost. I think when I hear this story, I would just rather be one of those tired, worn-out disciples.
Sure, Drew, I think everyone would rather be a disciple, tired and worn out after all that we've done for the sake of others. But, I mean, that's more heroic. But I just wonder if before we can talk about ourselves as disciples like that, if we don't need to first recognize our own need for healing. You know, it's that grace and healing that we receive from Jesus that frees us to be able to share God's grace with others.
So before I can see myself as one of those tired disciples, you're saying that I really first need to see myself as one of those people on the mat.
Yeah, you know, earlier when I was feeling scattered and sad and scared and needed you know, and other times when I'm confronted with my own limitations, when I'm really being honest with myself, Drew, I think I'm often in that crowd. I am often needing Jesus' healing.
You know, Sarah, I think you're right. I really do think that's what this story is about, because I think that's what the entire gospel story is about. It's about our deep need for grace and God sending Jesus into the world for those needs. It's about how God sees that the world is full of sheep without a shepherd, and so God sends the good shepherd, Jesus, into our midst to care for us when we're scattered and to heal us even when we're just laying on our mats, with just reaching out to touch the fringe of his cloak.
Yeah, but in Jesus' life and death and resurrection, Jesus has reached out and touched us. And in those times when we don't have a plan figured out, and we don't know where we're going, Jesus reaches out to teach us and guide us. And Jesus reaches out and touches those wounds in our life that still have power over us.
And when we're separated from people because of distance or anger or hatred, Jesus reaches out and breaks down those walls that separates us. Jesus heals those divisions.
And when we are on our mats, being carried to the only one who can heal us, Jesus reaches out with abundant grace.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, now I think when I look back on this year, this intern year, instead of just seeing myself as one of those busy disciples, always on the move, always rushing around, maybe I'll look back and I'll see myself as part of this crowd. Part of this crowd of people who, when I was lying on my mat, helped carry me to Jesus. And a lot of the times they were right there on the mat next to me. And together this year with this crowd, we have been witnesses to this incredible healing grace of Jesus, who is always reaching out to us.
Yeah. And that is worth being interrupted for.
Amen.